Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week talking about just a collection of awful people from history that you probably haven't heard of, because history has been full of awful people. And we're not talking about like serial killers or like Hitler or anything like that, but these are just some other generally just terrible people that have lived throughout history. Not unlike the United States government, who just our whole tax structure is so stupid. And I get it, because probably someone was along the way was like, I don't trust the government to take the right amount of taxes. And so then the government was just like, all right, then do your taxes yourself. And so not only do taxes get taken out of our paycheck every couple of weeks, but then at each year we have to go back and let the government know how much was that, or at least let the government know that we know how much money was taken out. And if you filled out your forms the wrong way, because you got to fill out a W-4, you got to fill out, at least in North Carolina, an NC-4. I'm sure in every other state it's another 4 thing. And then you got to make sure that you tell them how you're filing and what your little numbers are, if it's a 1 or a 0. And then you got to do math and you got to figure it all out yourself. And if you get it wrong, then you owe the government thousands of dollars in money. Not that I'm speaking from very recent past experience or anything, but God, what a pain. Just like, I don't know, man. The tax structure in this country is beyond stupid. And that alone just makes America not number 1 in the world, right? Like, still probably top 10, still holding on to that, but not the best. Certainly not the best. I think if the government's just going to take it out of our check, like that's just it. And that's it. It's gone. And that's all. And like, you don't get any back. We don't have to go through this stuff every year. It's just there's your money, government. Thank you for taxing me for having a job. And that's also stupid, but God, you have to have a job to live. But then the government also wants you to pay them for the money that you make. Not for the things that you use, but for the job that you have. And just, ooh, God, I just hate it so much. Here's the thing. Even if we had sales tax, which we do, but in a gas tax, which we have, some sort of highway tax, even if all the roads were toll roads, all right, fine. Maybe there's some other sort of utilities tax or something. Even if that ended up being more expensive, that would at least make sense. And I would be fine with that as long as it meant I didn't have to do my taxes every year, because it's stupid. Anyway, that's completely we're in the middle of June at this point. It's not even tax season anymore, but that was on my mind. Anyway, speaking of awful, here's some awful people. Our first story here is of Alexander Keith Jr., who was born in Scotland in 1827. His family soon immigrated to Nova Scotia in Canada, where Alexander began working for his uncle at his brewery. But Keith wasn't having a ton of fun doing that, so he began working as a secret agent for the Confederacy, because by now it's the 1860s, the Civil War is going on, and I don't know, being a spy for a rebel nation is more fun than working at a brewery in Canada. So Keith begins working as a courier and a blockade runner. He was first involved in the Chesapeake Affair, which was basically this diplomatic incident in which Union forces violated British sovereignty during this mission while trying to capture a Confederate ship, but it was in Canadian waters. And so there was this whole big kind of dust up, and like the British weren't really happy that the Americans were fighting each other in their territorial waters. And so it became this whole thing. Nothing really ever came of it, but Alexander Keith was involved in that. Keith also tried to help Confederates send clothes that were tainted with yellow fever to northern cities. So biological warfare going on during the Civil War. And then after swindling his own criminal associates out of a ton of money, Keith ended up marrying a woman from St. Louis and then settled out in the prairie states. One of his associates, though, eventually tracked him down and was going to get revenge and kill him for being conned. So Keith and his wife fled back to Europe. He changed his name to William King Thomas and then started kind of intermingling with wealthy socialites in Germany. He built up this whole backstory. And so he's, claiming that he's like a member of the nobility, and he's, back to conning people and all of that. But unfortunately, he began to run out of money and needed to figure out a way to continue living this lavish lifestyle that he had created for himself. But rather than getting a job like a normal person, Keith decided to try to commit insurance fraud. And not just insurance fraud on people like some serial killers would. He decided to start blowing up passenger ships, boats like the Titanic, not exactly the Titanic, but stuff like that, to get gigantic at the time insurance payouts. His plan was pretty simple. Like, he would insure several containers and briefcases that he would put on these passenger ships by claiming that they were full of gold coins and really expensive caviar, and then place them on board the ship as mail items. And so you know how you go to like UPS or even the post office and they're like, oh, what's the value of the thing? And you tell them a value. It's like, oh, do you want to insure this for this amount of money? Yes, I would. And so you can do that. Like, you can probably even do this today, right? You can, I do not recommend doing this, but I think theoretically you could go to UPS, give them a box and tell them that it's full of something very expensive, computers, gold bars, coins, whatever. And then you insure it for hundreds of dollars. You declare a value, you insure it for a certain amount of money, and then you just bomb the truck that the package was on, make the insurance claim, get money, and no one is any wiser. At least it's the gist of it. Again, don't do that. But if you were going to, that's probably how you would do it. The problem for Keith, though, was that he was only going to get about 150 pounds for each box, each cargo item that he placed on the ship. But Keith really needed the money, and he figured that there was nothing else he could do. So he went forward with this plan. So he gets a bunch of boxes on the ship, insures them for 150 pounds a piece. And as the last of the cargo, and basically instead of something actually valuable, Keith was placing bombs more or less in these pieces of cargo on the ship. But as the last box was being put on the ship, Keith's package slipped out of the attendant's hands and it hit the ground and exploded immediately. The blast was actually so massive that it caused two adjacent ships to completely flip over. Keith, who was watching from another ship in the harbor, actually saw this all happen. And then he walked into his suite and then shot himself. He actually survived the initial gunshot wound, but he ended up dying a week later from his injuries, but didn't even wait around to collect his insurance money, because I guess the ship the stuff wasn't supposed to explode until it was out at sea. And instead he caused just this massive explosion in the harbor and figured he was done for. And so he just killed himself, which is great. Our next story here is of James Jameson, who was the grandson of John Jameson, who, if you are an alcohol aficionado, yes, that is the founder of the Jameson Irish Whiskey Company. And so James Jameson, living the lavish lifestyle thanks to the massive wealth that his family had accumulated from their whiskey business, And like many overly spoiled wealthy heirs, Jameson spent a lot of time traveling just because he could. He didn't have any other responsibilities, and so he could just travel around the world. In 1888, he joined the Emin Pasha relief expedition to Central Africa to bring supplies to Emin Pasha, who was this leader of the Ottoman province in Sudan who had recently been cut off by a revolt, and so they needed help, and so there were all these relief missions and all there to it. So shortly after Jameson's party arrived in Africa, the expedition splintered off into different groups to provide relief for Emin Pasha in Sudan, and then annexing the land for the Belgian Free State colony in the Congo. There was like a disagreement. Like the expedition wanted to provide relief like they were supposed to. Another one decided, hey, we're all here. Let's just go ahead and colonize this place, which I don't know how easy that would have been. Somehow, James Jameson was put in charge of the rear column of the expedition, which was located in Ribakiba, which was just so happened to be a small village of cannibals in Sudan. Jameson, once he learned about this, he was very curious as to how cannibalism worked in practice and began working with a local slave trader named Tipu Tip to try to see if they could see some happen live. After a brief discussion, Tipu brought a 10-year-old slave girl to the camp and exchanged her for 6 handkerchiefs. So Jameson, no money even, just Jameson had these 6 handkerchiefs and he traded them for this 10-year-old girl. The village chief then took the handkerchiefs and claimed that this is a present from a white man. He wishes to see the girl eaten. And the villagers, who were more than happy to oblige Jameson, then went on to tie this girl to a tree and went off to go and sharpen their knives. And Jameson, he's like, oh man, this is really going down, bro. This is super cool. And he's journaling all of this. This is why we know this story took place. When the villagers returned, one villager walked up to the girl who was tied to a tree, stabbed her twice in the stomach, and then 3 other men came forward and starting cutting this girl into pieces. Over time, each villager would walk up to the tree and take a piece of the girl before going down to the river, washing the meat in the water. While all of this was going on, like until this girl died, like she never made a sound, like she just hung there on the tree, like she just accepted that this was what was going to happen to her. Jameson ended up dying later that year from a fever before he could ultimately be tried for murder. The Jameson family actually used their wealth to encourage the Belgian government to cover up the event and to just kind of keep the focus on their whiskey rather than their psychotic son who paid to watch a girl get cannibalized. Our final story here is of Marie-Élisabeth Cons-Boutboul, who was born on June 10th, 1924 to just a regular French family, which means they were super Catholic. Her strict father, very strict in terms of religion and academics and manners and properness and all that kind of stuff. He wanted Marie-Élisabeth to have a career in the legal field, but Marie just wanted to play the piano. She even failed basically the French equivalent of the bar exam twice just to get out of having to be a lawyer. But her family kept forcing her to go to school, and she ultimately received her doctorate in law and was sworn into the Paris Court of Appeals. Well, in 1950, Marie met a Tunisian Jewish dentist named Dr. Robert Nassim Boutboul and fell in love with him. The two got married, they had a daughter, and then began building this very high-profile life together in Paris. Unfortunately, Robert died in a plane crash only a couple of years into the marriage, which brought everything that Marie was building to a screeching halt. Like, she was really enjoying being this socialite. They were a really wealthy family. Everyone knew them, and all of a sudden, all of that is gone. Over 30 years later, in 1982, Marie's daughter, their only child, Dari, was one of the most famous equestrians in France, because France cares about that sort of thing. But Darry met Jacques Perrot, a high-profile lawyer in Paris, and the two kind of the same story. They fell in love. They start planning their own high society life together. And then Darry got pregnant. And so the two were rushed into a marriage so Catholic Jesus would be happy and the child wouldn't be this bastard little turd who was going to hell because it was born out of wedlock, because that's important, apparently. Well, after the marriage, Jacques turned out to be a horrible husband, as most Frenchmen are. Kidding. But he was constantly having affairs, constantly cheating on Darry, who eventually filed for divorce, which then turned into a contentious battle over the couple's now 3-year-old son. Jacques, however, fought back and then hired a private investigator to look into Darry's family to find whatever dirt he could. And this private investigator was not prepared for what he would find out. They quickly learned that Marie had been disbarred since the 1980s, even though she had continued practicing law. She had been disbarred for charges of corruption and embezzlement, including a time that she conned missionaries out of millions of francs over a 10-year period. Marie also faked having cancer on 5 separate occasions to get out of various issues and obligations. Which is funny. Like, it reminds me of the Alamo Christian Foundation when what's-her-face claimed to have terminal cancer for years to get more and more donations and sympathy and to get the cult followers to give them more money. And then she actually did get terminal cancer and died. But Marie, who spent over 30 years just faking cancer to get out of doing stuff, is just like, that's about as low as you can get, I think, in terms of like the lies that you can tell. But with all of that information, Jacques threatened to expose Darry's family if he did not get fair visitation of their child. So he uses all of this blackmail in the divorce proceedings to try to get more visitation rights. However, in a very shocking twist, Jacques was shot 3 times and killed on December 27th, 1985. This murder horrified everyone in Paris's upper class, but police had no idea who had done it. Crazy, right? Almost like the guy who gets all of this dirt dug up and then he suddenly gets shot and no one has any idea who did it? Huh. Right. So 4 years later, in 1989, the body of Bruno Dassach, a known hitman, was found floating in the water near Le Havre, a port city on the northern coast of France. It might be Le Havre, because it's spelled like Brett Favre, like F-A, like, you know how Brett Favre is like F-A-V-R-E? Well, this is F-A, or Le Havre is L-E, obviously, and then H-A-V-R-E. So I think it's Le Havre. I'm going with Le Havre. But anyway, this hitman's body was found in the water on the northern coast of France. And police started looking into this guy's life and quickly figured out the entire story. Marie-Élisabeth Cons-Boutboul had found out that her son-in-law, Jacques, had uncovered all of her dark secrets. And if he made all of that public, it would have wrecked everything. Like, her entire reputation would have been killed. Like, she would have been probably cast out from Paris's upper crust society, all of it. And so Marie then hired Dassach to kill him, to kill Jacques, to kill her son-in-law. And then after that happened, Dassach actually started telling people what he was doing, which is not what you're supposed to do as a hitman. Hitman's supposed to stay quiet. But he starts kind of throwing out everything that he was doing. And so then Marie had him killed, or she killed him herself. In an even more shocking twist, remember how I said that Marie's husband, Dr. Robert Nassim Boutboul, the father of Darry, remember how I said he died in a plane crash? Guess what? He didn't. He Marie had actually wanted to divorce him, but couldn't go through with it thanks to that old-fashioned Catholic guilt. So instead, Marie paid her own husband to fake his death and then move out of the country, which is insane to me. Like, how much pull does this woman have? And like, I get it. Like, she comes from a wealthy family, but like, I don't know. She's a fake lawyer who then married into this other wealthy dude, gets the Catholic guilt, wants a divorce, can't do it. So like, and here's the thing. How do you justify that? Right? It's like, Jesus doesn't want us to get divorced. So how about we just lie to everyone and just say that you're dead and you'll fake your own death and you'll move away. I'll even pay you a bunch of money. How is that better in Jesus's eyes than getting a divorce? I don't, oh God, I can't. Eventually Marie, she gets put on trial. She insists that she has nothing to do with either murder of Dosach or of Jacques Perrault. Instead, Marie starts blaming the Vatican, the Opus Dei, which is a subsection of the Catholic Church, and the Freemasons for like all conspiring against her for something. I don't know. It didn't make any sense. When no one believed her, obviously, she then faked having a heart attack during trial, and still no one believed her, especially after she faked her 7th heart attack. This woman faked 7 heart attacks while on trial, and no one believed her any single time. So this woman is a real piece of work because she's, on top of like claiming that she has cancer, now she's faking 7th heart attacks, right? Like, whoa. No, never mind that. No, this would have happened after that. I just had a weird connection where, like, you know how on Sanford and Son, the old man would fake having a heart attack? He's like, I'm coming, Elizabeth. And this woman is named Marie-Élisabeth. And I thought for a second, like, oh, maybe that's where that came from. But no, Sanford and Son would have happened before this. This is happening in the late 80s. And I think Sanford and Son was like the 70s. Or maybe it was happening around the same time. Anyway, either way, like, Sanford and Son happened before this. Anyway, that's beside the point altogether. Marie was eventually sentenced to 15 years in jail. However, she was released in 1988 due to, quote, poor health, but she lived for another 23 years and then finally died on April 15th, 2021 at age 96. Never confessed to any kind of wrongdoing whatsoever. What did we learn?